to Nights at the Movies, a film podcast with Paul Miller and Leslie Heimbaugh. This week on episode number 5, we are here to talk with you about some of our favorite guilty pleasure films. Of course, the last 2 times we were dominated with discussions of Christopher Nolan. This one's going to be a little bit more fun and a little bit talking about some of the movies that maybe don't necessarily resonate in our top 10s or even top 20s, but are films that we are probably going to stick around on if we see them coming up on TV. So, Leslie, thank you so much for being back here with
I'm so glad to be here. This is so much fun for me.
So this one was actually your idea.
Okay.
I remember when we first, on the very first podcast that we ever did, we knew what we were going to do for our first 2 episodes. And then it was like, we had like a little creative meeting, like, okay, what is the direction of this film podcast going to be? Because for us, we realized that this isn't something that we're going to do forever, and that we're going to try to get as many episodes in as we possibly can. And then, we'll have them, and they're not really dated, and they'll be good to talk about in the future.
Sure.
But this was one that on the list stood out to me. I'm like, I wonder where we're going to go with this. So when you first thought of this, what was it that you were originally intending to do with this episode?
Well, it's funny because a guilty pleasure for me is one that I want to watch constantly. And usually my kids say, oh, not this one again. And then they'll end up watching it with me and they'll say, oh, I'm kind of glad we watched that. That is fun, But these are movies I've seen way too many times, at least bits and pieces, if not the whole thing. And I find myself re-recording them when they come on because I just want to sit down and snuggle up with them again. And they're things that we quote from at home. They're just silly things that we end up just loving.
So when you're thinking about guilty pleasures, I really want you to take the lead because I feel like sometimes I kind of get a little long-winded in these podcasts, but I really want you to take the lead on this one. And I've got some really cool ideas of some things that I want to talk about with you, but I want you to kind of kick us off today.
Okay. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about my number one guilty pleasure, and that is the movie called Crimson Peak. And it's I can't think of the name of the director now. He's really well known for movies that the colors are surreal in the movie. And another quality of a guilty pleasure for me is the eye candy factor.
Guillermo del Toro.
Exactly. So he did the
Shape of Water.
The Shape of Water. And I'm not sure which movie came out first, if it was The Shape of Water or Crimson Peak.
So Shape of Water 2017, Crimson Peak I believe is 2014.
Okay. Well, I went back and found, then I must have found Crimson Peak after The Shape of Water because The Shape of Water just blew me away with the colors, and the story was magnificent too.
Also did Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah, that one I don't love so much, but it's the same idea. The colors are spectacular. My son loves it, but it's a little too on the fantastical side for me. But Crimson Peak, the 2 great actors that do horrible acting in this, but the clothes are fantastic. The sets are amazing.
It looks beautiful.
Yeah,
I've never seen it.
Absolutely beautiful. It's like these are movies that I can't really recommend, but yet I love them for some reason. I just cannot get enough of it. They're corny, but they just take you in. And Crimson Peak is the number one guilty pleasure on my list.
That's so interesting, like how you're approaching this. And not to say that I'm approaching it any differently, but I think that that's really unique, and that's why I was kind of curious where you were thinking about going with it.
But at the same time, a good lowbrow bodily humor. Count me in. I'm all in for that. The Something About Mary's and the Kingpins, disgusting movies, but to me, hilariously funny. And they're guilty pleasures for me. My kids don't tolerate Kingpin as much as I do because it's so gross. But it's not so gross.
I was going to say, I don't really look at it as being gross.
But there are things about it that really are pretty disgusting. But to me, I laughed my head off at Woody Harrelson, all the politically incorrect parts of it, him having, a rubber hand and being a condom spokesperson and all those things that just make me die. And some of the gags in the movie are really disgusting, like when he keeps seeing the vision of his landlady in his rearview mirror. But I still howl at those things because nobody would ever act like that in real life,
I love, and this is one of my areas for guilty pleasures is some of these zany comedies.
Yeah.
We talked about favorite comedies, and I went a little bit more. It's tough to say straight on
Yeah.
a comedy, but they were. I don't even want to call them dramatic comedies.
Yeah.
You know, they weren't over the top.
Yeah.
I do appreciate over-the-top comedies. I do appreciate
Me
a Something
too.
Without Mary. I do appreciate an Old School.
Yeah.
I do appreciate a Kingpin. Now, I am a bowler, so I'm sure that has something to do with it. And, of course, I love Bill Murray.
Yes.
And so for Bill Murray's... I dressed up as Ernie McCracken for Halloween a few years back. And what's fun... I will never forget this, because obviously the big... sort of running gag at the end of that movie is his comb over.
Yeah, no doubt.
So obviously, those who know me know that I keep my hair pretty short. So I shaved it down, and then I had a wig, and then I cut a huge hole in the back so I had the flap going. I'll have to. I'm going to share them personally with you. I'm not going to share them.
I would love that.
But to show you that was one of the times that I really went all out for my Halloween costume.
Yeah.
And the character of Ernie McCracken in that movie was, I mean, just, I will watch it just to see him.
Me too.
And,
Me too.
And so that is most certainly one of my guilty pleasures. Again, I don't look at them as epic movies.
Right.
I don't look at them as, oh my gosh, I have to watch it. But when I see Kingpin on, I'll watch it. When I see Old School on, I just turned Old School on like 2 days ago.
Anything, honestly, anything by the Farrelly brothers, I will watch. Even Me, Myself, and Irene, disgusting movie, but
Yeah.
so funny. And Dumb and Dumber. Only the first one for me. though.
Never got into Dumb and
my
Dumber.
God.
Never got into that.
So many funny lines that, the gag where he gives his partner X-Lax and then he's at this beautiful mansion and she says, I hope you're not using that bathroom. It doesn't work. I die over that every time.
So I really think that's a great thing here that we can kind of
Yeah.
have in common is that, these zany comedies,
Yeah.
while and interestingly enough, some of these actually really have held up as sort of comedy classics.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody stops and thinks of them as masters of
Oh,
the
no.
cinema. But it also shows the wide range of different types of films that people who enjoy film can enjoy for what they are.
Yeah, and plus they force people, stars into roles that, they might not necessarily be proud of, but it's so lucky. We're so lucky to get to see that side of them for a change. Bill Murray can do anything in my book, but I think I really love him the best when he's playing, a rotten slob. He's just the legendary comb over. Everything about that just kills me.
Oh, I just love thinking about it every time. Well, so what's another one of your guilty pleasures that you want to talk about?
If you want to talk about guilty pleasure franchise kinds of things like the Airplanes and the Naked Guns, that's another one. The puns in those just kill you. They're just so well done.
One of the things that I really took away, and obviously the CPC film series is something we're both very passionate about.
Yeah.
And Professor Davis, when he did Airplane, here's the thing with those types of movies: is airplanes. The airplane films were really popular well before I was ever of age to see them. And of course I've seen them in hindsight and they're funny. It's just not something that I always would be a go-to. Naked Gun a little different. I remember seeing Naked Gun 33 1/3 in the theater. That was, I think I just missed those. And I would say certainly Airplane, and this is of course just my opinion, doesn't really hold up. It didn't age particularly well.
And that's
Not to mention that the Naked Guns have O.J. Simpson in them,
Exactly.
which does, I think, detract from the way that we think about
it does. And this is again, when you have children the age of my children, they are not tolerant of this, and they have every right to be. But growing up in a different time, it's not that I still tolerate the bad behavior. It's just a gag that reminds me of a time that I grew up. I think in our first podcast I talked about my uncle bringing boatloads of films home from Germany. Airplane was one, and I just couldn't get over the because it was R-rated, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
And we were not allowed to see that, but my uncle coaxed my dad into saying we could watch that, and we just couldn't get over it. It was just, it was a life-changing moment for me that I'll just never forget. Then moving on to another guilty pleasure is just about anything with Nicolas Cage in it.
Okay.
I mean, certainly he's done good movies. Moonstruck.
He's all across the
But
board.
Moonstruck, if you've ever seen that movie, his acting is magnificent.
Sure.
But then
Leaving
you have
Las Vegas.
Yeah. Oh gosh. But then I just watched Con Air the other day. I mean, I can't get enough of that. It's so cheesy and stupid, but it's just so good. And Face Off. I mean, how could you lose with a movie that's John Travolta and Nicolas Cage at their absolute cheesiest.
Here's what's really interesting about Cage, and I think this is, he's got 108 acting credits. 108.
Well, his middle name is Anything
Yes.
for a Buck because he's always in financial trouble.
And I think that's part of the issue with Nicolas Cage is that he's made so many clunkers.
Yeah.
Many of which, Leslie, I'm reading the last 5 years. He's done. First of all, if I had to ask you what has he done in the last 5 years, you'd say nothing.
Yeah.
He has. Okay. Before we do this, it looks like he is slated to play Joe Exotic in a television miniseries
Yeah.
that's expected to be out. It's in pre-production right now.
Yeah.
How about that? He has, Leslie, at least 30 acting credits since 2015. Not one of them I have ever even so much as heard of, and which is very interesting. We're going way back. 2011, he was in one of the Ghost Rider movies, which I never saw.
Bad.
Wow, this is pretty incredible. You're going the whole way back to, the National Treasure franchise, which, in their own right, did fantastically at the box office. In fact, even the sequel here, Book of Secrets, made this is insane, $459 million worldwide.
Yeah.
So, of course, he also did Gone in 60 Seconds.
Yeah.
He did, there's, plenty of other films. Face Off has always been one of my favorites. I've probably seen, between Face Off and Con Air, I've probably seen them 30 times
Me
each.
too.
But, a movie like Leaving Las Vegas.
Oh, heartbreaking.
When you look back at that film, this is clearly him at his best.
The movie that was based on The Orchid Hunter, too. I cannot think of what it's called right this minute. Meryl Streep was in it with him. He was phenomenal in that, too. He played a set of twins, and it was really fantastic.
Leaving Las Vegas, he did win an Academy Award.
Yeah.
So, while this might be your guilty pleasure, I challenge you, Leslie, to look up some of his most recent films and give them a look and see. I do really appreciate the National Treasure series. In fact, I would be willing to put that up in my guilty pleasure list because I really enjoy that.
Yeah.
And what's even more interesting is I'm familiar with, we're familiar with Philadelphia and we're familiar with Washington. While there's obviously some embellishment here, that was actually how I learned about the Hall of Presidents at Mount Rushmore.
Absolutely.
Which, if you don't know, behind the initial intention was to have a museum at Mount Rushmore, and they definitely talk about this a lot in some of the National Treasure series. But that's how I learned about that, and then I became really enthralled with Mount Rushmore. But I do like those, and I do give him credit, but I have to be totally honest with you, he hasn't done much over the last 5 years or so that we would know of, but he's in all of these movies. It's pretty incredible.
Well, I will give anything he's in a few minutes just because of the cheese factor. But and a lot of times, too, I like to take a movie that I see reviews on that has people I have loved or appreciated or a storyline that I think I'll appreciate and that get bad reviews. And I like to see if I agree, if I think that's as bad as they say.
And I wonder, do you know what his financial issues have been and why he's been put in this situation where he has to do these films?
I don't know 100% for sure. One thing I think is he has trouble managing money, which is not to be made fun of. I think he's bought some exorbitant things in his lifetime that he really could not afford, that he couldn't sustain.
This is just off the top. A 2020 film called Jiu-Jitsu with an IMDb rating of 2.9 and a worldwide gross of, wait for it, $99,000.
Oh my God.
With Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
You'd think his name alone would be enough to get you to the million
Well,
mark.
he probably should be in a Tarantino film, and then maybe we could get him back again on the good side.
Well, with his Joe Exotic project, he might be a little busy.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
it is very sad. And honestly, this is a situation where I wonder if I might want to look into Nicolas Cage a little bit more and kind of see
What goes wrong.
What's happened.
Yeah.
Or maybe, you know what, maybe he just loves his job. Maybe he just loves to do this. And I would imagine that with all of the classic movies that he's been in, that he's probably still getting some type of
Sure.
money from those. But who knows? You never know. And I think that might be something interesting. But definitely an interesting way that you took
Well,
that
and he
one.
is not the only talented actor.
Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp. Actually, if you look at Robert De Niro, takes everything, it seems, that crosses his path, and he's done some real stinkers in the last couple of years.
That's something that I haven't really thought about, because when you think about De Niro, I mean, his films, the number of probably top 100 films that he is in is probably pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, he definitely does a lot. Obviously, I'll tell you what, the one that I really did like with him was his role in Joker.
Yeah,
I thought that he
of
was
course.
really good in that. And he, even...
But like Bad Grandpa, really? Robert De Niro, Bad Grandpa, come on.
I didn't particularly get into that
It's
movie.
horrible. But did he need to do that? My son says, hey, they wanted him. He made money on it.
I wonder what the connection there is, because I always have heard that he is a little tough to get on board for some of these. So I'm interested to know about some of his situations here. I'm looking for it. Dirty Grandpa.
Yeah, maybe that's what
With
it
Zac
was.
Efron.
But yeah.
$95 million worldwide. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is I think that, maybe some of these guys just love to do what they do.
Yeah.
And maybe they're just not finding, maybe they're getting a ton of scripts and they're just not finding anything. They just want to do something unique.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely curious about Nicolas Cage.
Well, I like that you're giving them the benefit of the doubt, because my take is anything for a buck, So.
It is their job.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
I mean, if they want to, continue making money. But, well, I wanted to chime in one thing here. Here's one of my biggest guilty pleasures, and it's sort of, for lack of a better term, sort of the buddy cop genre.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I have always, ever since I was a kid, I remember watching Beverly Hills Cop,
Oh,
the
yes.
whole series.
I just saw it the other night.
I mean, all of them are good in their
Yeah.
own right. Obviously, the first one is
first one's-
fantastic.
yeah.
I actually got into it at 3 because, again, of my age and being born in 1981, and
Yeah.
I think Beverly Hills Cop 1 came out in 84.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I obviously was too young. And again, these are the prototypical 1 and 2 are the prototypical 80s movies.
Yes.
I mean, they've got the synthesizer. Of course, Axel F is such an iconic
Yeah.
theme song, but it's definitely rings true of the 80s. Some of the more recent ones, certainly the one that he did not too long ago. I'm so terrible at gauging when things came out. I want to look the date up really quickly. So they were at one point talking about doing something, but of course, 1 came out in 84, 2 came out in 87, and then 3 came out in 94. So I think that these are always ones. And, obviously Eddie Murphy, you want to talk about a roller coaster of a career. I mean, he was Hollywood's #1 actor.
It was him
in the
in his
80s.
prime. It's what he did best. It was to me the most like his stand-up, and that's his stand-up is so. I mean, even one of them was called Raw, but it's really bad. But I mean, I loved it when I was younger, but it hasn't aged well at all. But Beverly Hills Cop was like the Eddie. You almost thought that was his real persona,
Now that I'm seeing this on IMDb, Beverly Hills Cop 4 has been announced.
Yeah.
Again, we do want to see things in pre-production
Yeah.
at this point, so it might be a couple of years till that comes out. But, this is a guy that really, his early career, 48 Hours, Trading Places, Beverly Hills Cop, Golden Child, Beverly Hills Cop 2, Coming to America, even Harlem Nights,
Yeah.
48 Hours. Even up Boomerang was kind of where he was getting ready to come down, and I'm always actually a huge fan of The Distinguished Gentleman,
Yeah.
From back in the 90s. And interestingly enough, I've actually used that film in some of my media and politics classes.
Wow.
Because there are certain pieces of it that it really helps you sort of understand the inner workings of the government. Now, again, I always preface it by saying, look, this is a comedy film and we're embellishing here.
Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting. And then, from about 90 to, let's call it 94, when Beverly Hills Cop 3 came out, he reinvented himself.
Yeah.
Came back with The Nutty Professor.
Well, and that's a guilty pleasure of mine too, because one guy playing almost all the characters in the movie, amazing.
And then, of course, one of the favorites, Daddy Daycare.
I did not see that one.
I have seen it. It's not certainly one of the ones that's on my top, Eddie Murphy films. Made $164 million worldwide. So definitely Eddie Murphy in that buddy cop mold. But I'll tell you another one that I absolutely love are the Lethal Weapon films.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was on vacation, Jackie usually goes to sleep before I do.
Yeah.
And when we were on vacation, Lethal Weapon 1 was on. I caught it about halfway, and then I watched Lethal Weapon 2. They are some of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
All of them. And obviously, they kind of make fun of themselves.
Yes.
In 4, at least.
Yeah.
3 was still a little, but they're placating to the characters that they were a decade before.
Yes.
Which I think is funny, and
Yeah.
I think that they do a pretty interesting job. But I love these films. You want to talk about a guilty pleasure? It's these type of kind of like buddy cop movies.
Well, and Mel Gibson, another person that had it all and blew it.
I think that's absolutely fair. I mean, he barely is even in any. I mean, he's still making movies.
Yeah.
But
Nobody really cares anymore what he does because they're done with him.
Listen, we're going all the way back to 2005.
Yeah.
And I don't. Okay, he was in Machete Kills, he was in and I remember that, and he was in one of the Expendables movies. But I got to be honest with you, I've not even heard of any of these other films that he's done, and we're going all the way back to 2005.
Yeah.
And I mean, even prior to that, I mean, you want to talk about, this is a guy that you want to talk about some of the films he was in. Obviously, Mad Max, he was in the Lethal Weapon films, ton of Hamlet, just when you're looking through these, it's Maverick even.
Yeah.
Maverick was a great movie.
Yeah. Oh,
I remember that. Ransom was a good one.
Yeah.
So, one of the most popular actors in, of course, Passion of the Christ, which is still one of the top grossing films of all time.
Braveheart. That's another.
Braveheart, of course. How could I forget Braveheart?
It's high on my list of great movies, but it's also high on my list of guilty pleasures because I will jump in on that anywhere you put me. And my kids groan. They're like, not this again. But I love that movie.
But these two, the Lethal Weapon franchise and the Beverly Hills Cop franchise, when you said about guilty pleasures, I knew that this was the one that I wanted to talk about. So those are always ones that I like. I will jump in on it when I see them.
Well, and mentioning Braveheart leads me into Dances with Wolves, another beautiful movie, but another guilty pleasure for me. I can't even guess how many times I've seen all or part of that movie, but I love that movie. And to me, that was Kevin Costner at probably his most powerful too. I mean, he's done some other great things, but to me, that was one of his absolute best.
Quick trivia question. If you had to guess, what year did it come out?
Dances with Wolves, I'll say 1989.
1990, very close.
Yeah.
A $22 million budget for a $424 million take.
Yeah.
This was one I remember seeing in the films, or in the movies. So this is one that I really remember.
Yeah.
I remember, of course, I talked about how I got into movies and going to the movies with my mom and her friend who unfortunately passed away back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And this is one that I remember going to
the
with them.
music from it too just kills you.
I was 8 years old, so so I didn't really appreciate it the way I probably could have, or 9 years old.
Yeah.
But at 3 hours and
Yes.
1 minute, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But gorgeous. I mean, when
Yeah.
you talk about what movies can be, obviously the plot is very, very well written. Obviously, there's some truth here. There's some basis in truth here. But this is one of the things that I always talk to the students about, is that for something to be based on a true story or inspired by actual events, literally all it needs to be is one person in the movie may have existed.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
And I think that's I'm not really sure why film makers go to that point.
Right.
Maybe there's some legality issue there that they have to. But I think that this is one that definitely you can look back on in the scope of film over the last 40 years. If you would leave this movie off, there's something wrong.
Exactly.
If you were trying to tell the story of film
Yeah.
of from 1980 to 2020,
Right.
there'd be no way you could write such a book without putting Dances with Wolves in there.
That's exactly. And like you talk about based on a true story, but if you're not moved by a movie like Dances with Wolves or Braveheart, or there's a Scottish one too that Liam Neeson's in that was an epic like that. They were decent depictions of what life was like. If a Civil War soldier had to go out to the West alone and figure out what he was doing and not go crazy, you could see this would be a natural connection. Whether or not he would have been that close to indigenous people, I have no idea. But to me, it seems like something that could happen. And if that's where your imagination runs to, that's a good place,
Well, okay, we've got time for one more guilty pleasure each, and I'm going to go. I wanted to talk about Star Wars. I wonder if maybe we have a future podcast that just focuses on some of our favorite blockbusters or something.
Yeah, that's a good idea, because I would have to watch some Star Wars to even...
Well, and I wouldn't ask you to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe you could just
The early ones I saw as a kid, and I loved them then, but...
But here's my final guilty pleasure, and it's the Chevy Chase led Vacation franchise.
Okay, that's good.
From the original Vacation to European Vacation, of course, everybody's favorite Christmas Vacation. Vegas Vacation didn't get much run for me, but the new I can't say new because it's 5 years old now, version of Vacation with Ed Helms and Christina Applegate, as well as Chevy Chase and Beverly D'Angelo do make an appearance, and many other cameos, including Thor himself is in the film. They are one of my guilty pleasures. And I was telling you off air, one tradition that my family has is either Christmas Eve. Back when I lived at home, it was always Christmas Eve. We'd watch Christmas Vacation, but now it's morphed into Christmas Day. Mm-hmm. Now that we do it at my house, we sit down, we eat, we open the presents, we put on Christmas Vacation. It's
fantastic.
like clockwork every year. But what I was trying to tell you was, obviously over the last year and a half, we've had a lot more time at home than we probably would have wanted to. And this was a series that I caught. It was on. So I don't know how much you watch IFC.
Yes.
And the reason that I watch IFC, and maybe a lot of people don't know this, is not everything they have, but most things they have are unedited and no commercials.
Oh, that's good.
So if you can catch the right movies on there, you're not getting a TV edit, and there's either limited or no commercials. Now, again, not all the time, and it depends what it is.
That's it.
And I caught Vacation, the whole series, right in a row. So I just recorded all of them, and I spent, a week while we weren't able to leave our homes watching these. And it's just, I wanted to put these outside of the zany comedies because I do think they're at least realistic comedies, you know, not in the way that Kingpin or Something About Mary is. They're more slapstick to me. Not to say that National Lampoon's films aren't a little bit of slapstick, but I wanted to at least mention those myself. Obviously, I think we've all seen Christmas Vacation more times than we care to count. But I think it's worth noting that Vacation and European Vacation are also good. And I think if you haven't seen the newer one, I think it's definitely worth a shot if you're a fan of the series.
Well, just quickly, Chevy Chase, all he has to do is show up and I start smiling and laughing. And the Fletch movies were a staple of my childhood too. But I'm going to just quickly mention my last guilty pleasure, and that is the things like Pitch Perfect, Bridesmaid, and like Clueless, like those where women, are funny, and they sort of rule the day.
I must say I have seen Pitch Perfect's not my thing, but I have seen Bridesmaids.
Yes.
Jackie is a huge. I mean, anytime that's on, that's probably one of her biggest guilty pleasures. But I really like that movie.
Yeah, I love it.
A lot. I think that group of Saturday Night Live alumna are just. Everything they do is funny.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, I know she likes it, so we always go to see it.
Right.
I would also point out that one, and I think this is worth me bringing up. I took her. She loves musicals, and I took her to see La La Land.
Yes.
And I believe I told you this.
Yes.
She didn't like it. I loved it. I went in like I'm literally just taking her to see this because I know she's gonna like it,
and because you're so nice.
and she it's not to say she didn't like it. It just didn't resonate with some of the maybe what she was expecting, or I loved it.
Yeah.
And I never thought in a million years I would like that movie. And the opening sequence in that to me personally, when I think about some of the most memorable moments in film, it is that first 10 minutes of La La Land. Like this is really amazing.
It was amazing, and yet I was afraid it was all going to be like these wide shots of lots of dancers, and I didn't want that.
Right.
But I did think, in retrospect, fantastic.
But yeah, I definitely enjoyed Bridesmaids a lot, and I've probably seen that a good 30 or 40 times as well.
Absolutely. Well, there you have it.
So, I mean, I just wanted to, kind of recap, some of the guilty pleasures. I love the Vacation franchise. I love the Lethal Weapons and the Beverly Hills Cops. And, of course, those old zany comedies like Kingpin and Old School.
Absolutely. And the good old Nicolas Cage films, some of the girl buddy kinds of comedies I love. And I did not mention two others, but The Devil's Advocate, Keanu Reeves, I feel the same way about him as Nicolas Cage. He can be fabulous and he can be awful. And that movie is a complete guilty pleasure for me.
Huge fan of The Matrix, I am. And I'm so looking forward to the new Matrix
that's
coming out so
there
soon.
You go.
So, Leslie, I must say that this was definitely an interesting one to do, because usually what we're doing is looking at our favorite films, and this sort of forced me to kind of step back a little bit.
Yes.
Because it's not just, hey, I'm not some stuck-up film watcher.
Exactly, me neither.
I'll gladly go out and watch Fast and the Furious.
Yeah.
And just because it doesn't rank at the very top doesn't mean that it's not still fun.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the most important things about what we're doing here at this podcast is I don't want to go to a very, very niche demographic of people who are only watching art house films.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to talk about some things more approachable.
Yeah, exactly. This is fun.
Cool. All right, well, that's going to do it for another episode of Nights at the Movies. For Leslie Heimbaugh, this is Paul Miller, and we'll see you again next month.